Hey gentlefolk, my name is Malte Krug. Welcome back to another episode of All About Keys. And just like that, we made it into the second year in the life of the German keyboard magazine. It's been a fun ride for me so far, and I'll keep it going. Thank you a lot for joining me on this trip. I'm going into the second year of my channel as well, and something that I learned from my first round is that I have to pre-produce episodes for the upcoming summer. My day job mostly happens then and sees me traveling for weeks sometimes, away from my gear. Moreover, I'm planning on more frequent videos outside of this series. Originally, this was only planned as a side project to other individual features, but somehow it turned into the main attraction. I can live with that. So let's again check out what the Keyboard Magazine had to offer 40 years ago in January 1986. And it's the first issue I have an issue with. What the problem is? I'll tell you at the end of the magazine review. The cover this time shows a some magazine-featured gear drifting in space. Although I don't know what is getting shown on this old CRT monitor. I can't connect that to any of the tested softwares from this issue. We have the usual content list beside a very unappealing ad from Akai. I guess they only got offered 2 colors for that page. Oh, and down here is the explanation for the aforementioned monitor picture. It's made with a Fairlight CVI computer video instrument. There's a page on the internet if you're interested in early sound visualization instruments. If you're into early 1980s MTV video styling, check out that site. They have assets to download for free and others to purchase. And again, the letters to the editor. And this time, I like to point out one of these because I have this problem every time I get called to tune a Yamaha CP70 or 80. Heinz is asking about a tuner that would help him tune the low notes of his CP70 because he's having problems while trying to do that. The answer just says that even with a tuner it is a difficult task and he should wing it by ear. I don't want to go too deeply into the physics of that problem, but due to the dimensions of those bass strings, being short, thick and therefore stiff, the harmonics you would need to hear for tuning are not loud enough for doing that. And if you can't hear it, a tuner can neither. In the news section, we can see a different kind of letter. Edgar Fröse, from Tangerine Dream fame, wrote a letter about his experiences with the Akai S612, mentioning not only the good but also some, in his opinion, bad points he would like to have them address. I had the chance to work for Tangerine Dream once a few years ago, when Edgar was still alive. It was for a single show at the Shepherd's Bush Theatre in London, and he has been the nicest guy ever to work with. Maybe one of you guys has been at the gig as well. On this page, the Alpha Juno 2 is briefly mentioned, and here the rec version of the Mirage sampler gets announced. You've already seen it in the flesh in my 2-parter feature of this machine a few months back. Same goes for the announcement of the Korg X8000, the rec version of the DW8000. Its video can be found here. In the same paragraph, they show a 6-channel keyboard mixer in rack shape and the fantastic DVP-1 vocoder. Unfortunately, I never got hold of one. But if you're interested in vocoders, their function and their sound, I could come up with a video, because I have some effects and synthesizer units with vocoder built in, like the Boss SE70 or the WaveStation AD, among some others. Might be interesting to compare the sound differences. Leave a comment if that sounds compelling to you. Some new records get presented with new albums from Christopher Cross, David Byrne, Elton John, Joni Mitchell and some others. The artist featured in this issue of the Keyboard Magazine is Brian Eno. He's been in Cologne for some video art installation of his, so they took the chance to interview him there. I think this is the first time they use inverted font layout. Next is Practical Use of Microphones Part 5, which completes the collection of basic microphone varieties from last time, plus how to connect microphones properly, including the usage of phantom power or batteries, which is possible in some cases. Happy Sampling Part 2 concentrates on the concept of multi-sampling. These graphs on the right show the difference of how the harmonics of a real instrument behave when being played in different pitches compared to when a single sample of it is taken and then pitched. The first test this month features the DigiDesign Sound Designer software. This is the first generation of digital tools to not only edit samples, but also to creatively alter them into something completely different. This is the oldest ancestor of what will evolve into what we know now as Pro Tools. Only one page of sound börse this time, patch sheets for synthesizers that readers send in to share with others. Here you can see how clunky a head-wearable wireless microphone looked like in the day. in this case made by Biodynamic. This might not stay on if you're a dancing pop act. The only minus they give this in their summary, though, is that it's not possible to do any physical dynamics with a distance to the microphone while singing. I really would have loved to win the giveaway of January 1986, the Akai AX80, which got tested in one of the earlier issues, but I had to wait a few more years for my turn. You'll see then. Here on the left, in this ad, we can see two of the new digital pedals from Boss. Back then, we were totally flashed by the sound quality of those. They really reproduced what you put in. Yeah, I know. I remember testing one of these at a shop in my hometown together with my then guitarist, and afterwards we were really disappointed going back to the analog bucket brigade delay he had on his stress board. Nowadays I would prefer one of those for sound design, but the digital delays were not really cheap, and we couldn't afford one. The Alpha Juno 1, Roland's latest attempt to continue their cheaper series of Juno synthesizers. This is the smaller of the two models, which only differ in that the Alpha Juno 2's keyboard is longer and dynamically playable. But this test is only about the number 1 model. Even these 1 DCO plus sub-oscillator models were still too expensive for me then, but I remember playing both models in a different shop than the one we tested the delays in. Then I already was completely addicted to synthesizer sounds, so I had to get my fix in those shops. I recall spending hours and hours in even another shop trying out every button and fader of a Juno 6, without actually knowing what those were for or what all the words meant that were printed on the front. The next test presents us with an effects unit that might be interesting again for some today. A stereo spring reverb unit made by Korg. The tester doesn't like it too much though, but he might have thought of the newer digital generation of reverb units and compared apples and pears in his mind. I wouldn't mind to have one of these. This Allen & Heath recording mixer can have different patches of signal routings of the in and outputs when used in tandem with the C64 home computer. Pretty rudimentary if you consider the total recall and dynamic mixing we can do nowadays inside a modern DAW. The Tom is the second digital drum machine made by Sequential following the drum tracks. And if I check this picture, it is not exactly small. It's 44 centimeters wide, 1.5 feet for you imperial guys. It basically works like all pattern and song mode based drum computers of the day. The tester compares the sound quality of the Tom to be something between the Yamaha RX-11, which I showed in this video, and its ancestor, the Sequential drum tracks. But it's possible to swap sounds in exchanging some EPROMs. In the test they mention some percussion sets with varying quality. Instruments and patterns can be programmed with dynamics through MIDI. They say here that due to the lack of individual outputs for the instruments, this machine is aiming more at the home and semi-pro studio geek than to the pros. And one drum machine gets directly followed by another one, the Yamaha RX-21, which is an even smaller drummy compared to the RX-15, with sounds that differ a bit. They are still 12-bit though. I only can show you the RX-21L here, which is the percussion brother to the RX-21. But they share the chassis. Other than the older RXs, the 21 contains 44 undeletable preset patterns which can be used as inspiration for your own creations. The song mode is only chaining patterns together. So far so usual. A piece of news is that the display helps you out a bit better with step recording, showing a single line of steps with dots where you want the then selected instrument to sound. I guess Yamaha took a look at the TR-707. Before we come to the workshops, we get dumped in another list for typing off the software for last month's DIY MIDI interface for the Atari XL computers. And the font gets smaller every time. The drum computer workshop features shuffle grooves based on triplets, which result in 12-step patterns. The organ workshop explains how to use the bass pedal of the instrument for proper bass lines, and in basic theory we switch from chords to rhythm and dynamic lessons. In the piano workshop we get a rock and roll lick for beginners, including tips for rehearsing it with increasing difficulty and tempo. In comparison to the latter, the classic piano workshop hits us with one of Bach's piano pieces. The home recording workshop continues with the second part of sound effects. In this case, using cassette tape decks or reel-to-reel tape machines with an individual playhead behind the recording head as delays. It also requires a mixing desk and wrapping your head around the concept of the signal path. The second home recording workshop informs us about autolocators, which were units that can be used together with certain tape machines whose drive could be controlled remotely. You would have used this for marking points in time on the tape, which is practical if you need to get to one or more fixed positions on it. maybe for playing a loop between two positions so the guitarist could rehearse his solo a few times before actually recording it. This isn't a loop how we understand it nowadays, because the tape has to rewind from the end position to the start, which takes time. But having this automated is a lot less stressful than eyeballing the rewind time with an abstract counter. SEMT timecode is mentioned as an absolute pro feature here, and in fact would make the whole process more precise. So you could even have had automated punch-in and out procedures without being in danger of overdubbing parts on the tape you wanted to keep. Okay, long explanation for something nobody's using anymore in the days of unlimited track count and indestructible recording digitally on the computer. I still thought you needed to know. After a few months of not having it, in the synthesizer workshop, we learn about the basics of brass instruments and how to synthesize them on different machines the author owns. In this case, a Prophet 10, an OBX-A, and for us regular musicians with regular wallets, the Poly 800. This advert announces another magazine from the same publisher, the Musicians-Magazin. I never bought this, because it dealt with everything the musicians in a band could be interested in, but not keyboards, so I wasn't interested. And before the flea market closes the magazine content as usual, we get a new annual feature, the content overview of the last 12 issues of the magazine, so it's easy to find a certain article without digging through all individual ones. They kept doing this until the end of the magazine. And we end here with a nice colored photo of the Korg SQD1, and I had that in a video as well. So, what now? As I already mentioned in last month's episode, I do not own any of the tested gear from this month's keyboard magazine. This will happen on occasion in the future again, so I decided for these cases to dig out the runner-ups of gear that didn't make it into the respective video of the month, due to a more interesting piece of kit that outshone them. This time, it's the Roland DDR-30 digital Drummodule from last October's keyboard magazine. And here we have the Roland DDR-30 in a corner of my studio you guys haven't seen a lot yet. It's in a rack with a lot of other drum modules made by various companies from all over the place. We'll get to all of these in time. If any of you haven't watched the October 85 episode, here's a little info about the unit. As far as I know, this is Roland's first drum module in rack shape, which is using samples as a means of sound generation, and is not primarily aiming at keyboard players. In the mid-80s, there has been a massive hype about the SIMMONS-type drum sounds, which were based on analog technology to achieve those fat electronic sounds. Those were the drum sets with the trademark hexagon-shaped pads. If you want to hear some Simmons, check out old Clock DVA albums or something by Spliff. I never played any because they were not cheap and I'm not really a drummer, but I heard playing those pads wasn't friendly to your wrists. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Simmons were massive, and most of the other established drum manufacturers tried to have a share of this cake and came up with their own systems. Sonor's Mini Mammut comes to mind, me at least being this old. Back to the DDR-30, which, by the way, in those days in West German ears sounded awkward for naming a machine. Anyhow, Roland didn't try to mimic real drums. Drummers had those already, but a lot wanted those new Simmons sounds, and so Roland jumped in with this unit. The DDR-30 can be played through MIDI as well, not only by pads connected to the 6 trigger inputs, so it can be used with a sequencer too. Sounds in this, as I said, are based on samples, and due to their length, cymbal sounds required a lot of that expensive memory space, and drummers preferred to keep using their real hi-hats and cymbals anyway. We only get 6 different instrument types: bass drums, snare drums, and 4 toms, each with 8 variations, adding up to 48 different sounds, which can be edited and then saved in 32 drum sets. Using a memory cartridge of the type we saw in the JX8P video triples that number. Let's check the front panel. Something that stood out in the day is this nowadays normal so-called alpha dial. And I think the DDR-30 surfaced even before the Alpha Juno synthesizers, which sported this style in their name. Luckily, other companies liked this thing too and put it on their machines in the following years. The aforementioned 32 drum sets are organized in 4 banks of 8 sets. Roland used this concept of octal memory structuring in the next years a lot, including in the famous D50, albeit with 8 banks of 8 for a total of 64 patches. If the drummer was nice and on good terms with his keyboarder, he could ask him to throw over a MIDI chord from his rig and remote switch the sets for each song. Or the drummer uses 2 regular foot switches connected to the back of the DDR-30 to get to other drum sets. Some editing is possible using this section of the panel buttons.
and I will show in a minute how deep we can go with adapting the sounds to our taste. Let's hear some drums now. The first set is what we get sounding as close to real drums. And I got my old Drumcat Easy drum pad to play those, because for those 1980s glorious toms, you need to do the rolls with real sticks. And I'm using a sustain pedal for the bass drum. At first, I thought the pad sat too long on the shelf because it didn't work properly, but then I realized that the memory battery was completely dead. If any of your electronic gear shows some strange behavior after a while of being not used, check the internal battery first. Don't forget to do a memory reset after a battery change if the unit allows this. But I digress. Just for the fun of it and for having a full set, I added hi-hat and cymbal sounds coming from the TS10. Here's some of the sounds. This is definitely a snare I liked in the day. Yeah. Sounds like they sampled some timpanis. Oh yeah. This is so 80s. Before you get to hear some drum patterns I created utilizing the TS10 sequencer, let me show you the voice edit parameters. More detaily stuff like filters or envelopes are nowhere to be seen. There are 4 edit groups: voice, pitch, gate, and equalizer. As soon as we choose which sound to edit in the main menu, which is here, instrument select, and we're sure that we play the right key, just hit the key for the edit group of parameters we want to alter. We're starting with voice. The first parameter is shown immediately, in this case source number. And in using the forward or backward button, we can scroll through the few parameters of each edit group. Okay, remember I told you about that we have a choice of 8 different sounds for each of the 6 instruments in the set? Well, this is only half true. We have 8 patches per instrument. Patches contain not only the sample we're using, but also the settings of the edit parameters I'm showing you right now. These 8 patches are based on one of only 4 samples for each of the bass drums and snares. The toms share the same 4 tom samples. With tom 1 to 4 we just get 4 individual patch slots which can be used independently, so the toms in a set might only differ in the pitch. To sum this up, this massive drum module only contains 12 different samples. Again, memory was expensive back then, even ROM. But like every synthesizer with only a few waveforms, the final sound depends not only on what the oscillators are doing. Here are those samples. Bass drum 1 to 4. Snare drum 1 to 4. This could even be a sample from a real Simmons drums. And the toms. The last one sounds like a timpani, and number 3 is a natural one. The bend is coming from the already altered pitch parameters. Okay. Back to the parameters. After the choice of the source waveform, there is the self-explanatory level, which is just for adjusting the volume of this sound compared to the others in a set. Envelope decay is, as you can hear, it changes the sound's decay time. And with it we get rid of some of the noise at the end. The next 2 parameters don't do a lot for me using a keyboard, but might have more subtle effect when using trigger pads. The attack and the attack decay are for altering the response of the volume change to dynamics. That concludes the edit parameters of the voice group. The pitch group is next. And the first parameter is similarly easy to understand as level in the former group. The pitch might need some extra tweaking later because the following parameter is affected as well. Bend depth, how far does the pitch get bent? Bend decay, does the sound get bent immediately or later? Dynamic sensitivity, the harder I hit, the farther the sound gets bent. The gate group is for achieving those 1980s Phil Collins-like cut-short drum sounds. The original is done with a gate on the reverb, but this comes close. There are two gates which only differ in that the first one can be switched on by dynamic playing. Gate 2 works even with low velocity notes. And the final added group has only two parameters. It's a simple two-band equalizer, one band for low and the other for high frequencies. I couldn't find any info about the actual filter frequencies, but this is for drummers, not audio techs, so maybe Roland couldn't be bothered. You might want to be careful with the EQ, especially with low toms, to avoid frequency clashes with the bass drum. The four buttons to the right have to do with MIDI parameters, switching to cartridge, copying drum sets into other memory slots, maybe onto said cartridge, and the sensitivity parameter if the DDR30 is played with the pads that are connected to the trigger inputs at the back. Speaking of the back, I forgot to mention that in addition to the stereo output I'm using now, there are 6 individual outputs, which are nice to have for doing some proper mixing. Let me return to pads briefly. A long while ago I bought a used Dynacord drum brain coming with 2 tom pads and the bass drum trigger pad Roland made for the DDR30. And when I dug out the latter again recently to check it out for this video, the plastic of the shell gave way and it basically disintegrated in my grip and cut my hand with the resulting sharp plastic edges. Let's say it didn't age well. The tom pads are fine though. By the way, the hexagon pads were patented by Simmons, so Roland had to come up with a different shape and you can see it here in the manual. But now for some examples of how this thing sounds when being played as a drum set. I'll hit it with a short drum pattern coming from the TS10 and will switch the drum sets frequently to hopefully cover a representative range of sounds.
The DDR30 made by Roland. It is not covering a lot of ground when it comes to the amount of sounds it can produce, but this one-trick pony does its one trick very good. If you're looking for exactly those 1980s-style electronic drum sounds in a module with trigger inputs, that is, there's a reason why Yamaha made a cartridge with similar samples for their RX-5 drum computer just a few months later. In the next episode, we'll deal with a synthesizer again, made by a company that wasn't exactly famous for making one of those. By the way, if you see a unit in the background of one of my videos and you want to know more about it, leave a request in the comment section down below. Thanks for being here with me. If you want to help this channel, please consider to do all the usual clicking under this video. You know the drill. See you again soon on All About Keys.